Unless you're just afraid of them.
Yeah, I think the only person who's vaguely.
I didn't vote now, I can tell you that.
I'm happy to be out of that suit.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Madam Secretary.
So before we resume the workshop, I understand that you all had another interesting stay. But here's the good news: no fire alarm.
It was bracing.
If we're playing baseball, it's strike two.
May I say, however, how awake you all look this morning. I don't know how you do it. Mr. Williams?
Cold, too.
Okay.
I think they chilled the water.
So Mr. Donahue and Margie Ray. Good morning.
Good morning,
You don't
Madam
look
Chair.
quite as refreshed as everyone else. I don't know.
I've been here for a while this morning.
Haven't we all?
The General Assembly starts quite early. Good morning, members of the board. Nick Donahue with Margie Ray here, and I'm going to disappear in about 10 minutes because of the General Assembly. But I just wanted to kind of, as we kick this off, you all challenged us several months ago when we talked about performance measures and target setting to not do kind of the traditional just trend line setting thing, to actually go back in, do a data-driven process, look at, for fatalities and severe injuries, what happened last year, how do we think external factors might change that absent, improvements and strategies you may implement, look at the effect of those things you have a chance to fund and how they might influence and reduce that number, and use that type of process to set our targets. Margie is here today. She's going to walk you through that. We have done that for safety. We intend over the coming months to replicate this process for reliability, congestion, and the other performance measures. And what I'll say is, as we've looked at this, we've already come away just from safety with some policy implications kind of moving forward. So again, I think as we set these targets, we're really looking at whether or not our investment strategies are delivering the results that we want. And I won't be here, but I'm sure the Commissioner and Ms. Ray will talk a little bit about some of the policy implications we've already identified in the safety area here. And I think it's a really positive sign. The one thing I would just ask you to keep in mind, particularly as we talk about smart scale, and in smart scale we can answer every single question and drill down. We are at the vanguard in doing this nationally. We are the only state, to my knowledge, who has done this. So this is good and extremely better than what we used to do. It is far from perfect, but you have our commitment that we will keep working on this and looking at ways to refine this. But to me, as you look at smart scale, you look at VTrans, and you look at performance measures, those three things, once we have the system fully stood up, will give you all as a board the tools to be a truly informed policy board, understanding how your decisions are influencing outcomes and the problems that we see, so that hopefully we can deliver better results for Virginians. So again, thank you, and again, much better, but far from perfect with what we have this morning. So thank you.
Good morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I don't know about starting off with this far from perfect issue, but anyway, there has been a lot of work over the last 6 months. If you all recall, we met back in July last and did commit to really doing some deep dive into a lot of information. And so today I'm going to give you a little bit of some of the background on where we've been, some of the things that we have found from that. So just a quick reminder of the measures that we look at for safety. We have 5 measures: the number of fatalities, and the rate of fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, the severe injuries, and the rate for the severe injuries. And then we have the combined non-motorized fatalities and severe injuries, so our pedestrian bike ped. Of these 5, 3 that we have to work with DMV, and when we submit our targets to our federal partners, the DMV and VDOT targets need to align and match. So we work closely with them. Back in July, we talked about 5 key steps that we were going to go through. And so over the last 6 months, we've been able to go through these 5 steps. And so today, at the end of this, we have developed new targets for 2019 based on this data-driven process. The next few slides really trying to recap each of the steps as far as the process that we took and then the outcome of that step and a little bit of how we might have used that moving forward into the future steps. And then really at the end of it coming down to what are those key findings that we had and our conclusions. So when we looked at step one, if you all recall back July last year, we had the Venn diagrams, you know, the pretty little picture. Well, that was an initial look at these 4 critical behaviors and trying to put them in buckets and understand from crash reports how those behaviors interact, and then part of the goal then understanding how infrastructure might influence crashes when a behavior is involved. And so we looked at these 4 buckets of the impaired, distracted, speeding, and unbelted occupants. To go into a little bit second cut at that study, we really needed to define create definitions for those different behaviors so that we could start looking at the severity of those behaviors. So we did a lot of research into definitions, and just to give you an example with speeding, we looked at, from the crash reports, we have some information about the speed of the crash at the time of the crash, and we did a lot of study to show that a speed limit greater than 20 miles per hour over the posted speed limit, infrastructure can't influence that much. So it's presumed that we can have very little impact through an infrastructure improvement when somebody's speeding that fast. So it's something that's a little bit more egregious. But then we also looked at things like distracted and trying to understand high, medium, and low impacts from distractions. And yesterday, Kathy McGee talked about some of the work that Virginia Tech and others are doing. They're called naturalistic studies, and it's basically looking at the relative risks of the distracted behaviors that various distractions that are occurring in the moments before a crash occurs. And so they can see that there's certain level of severity of the crash as a result of the type of behavior that may be underway. And Mr. Kasperowitz, I think you were interested in this from a behavioral perspective. So for example, if I'm just looking at scenery, we think that we would put that in the bucket of high. And a high effect is that there's still a high probability that the infrastructure improvement would have a positive impact or reduce the severity of the crash. On the low end of that would be something along the lines of texting, or maybe I'm eating food or something like that, things that get to be a little bit more egregious from my behavioral aspects. And so that we wanted to bucket these things. And when we can bucket these things, we can start looking at relative severity of the data that's included in those crash reports. So again, it's the behavioral factor can then be considered as that probability that the improvement would have an expected crash reduction and would be successful. I mentioned about safety, that if you're going way too fast, then there's probably nothing that we can do through an infrastructure project. We also have the example here of obviously drunk. So that was one of our definitions as well. From those crash reports, we saw they checked the box that they're obviously drunk, or there's a blood alcohol content of greater than 0.08. Again, we don't think that an infrastructure improvement can do much with that, so we're presuming that in our analysis moving forward. We do know that people survive some of those things, but we just needed to draw that line and define these things. So now we took that information, these new definitions, and we applied that. And if you recall the population of crash reports we were looking at, it was about 3,800 fatality crash reports and over 40,000 serious injury crash reports. And we were able to kind of redistribute those behaviors based on these new definitions. And kind of the key takeaway from this is the category of the non-behavioral and the percent that we're looking at that. Back last July with our first cut at this, we could see that we thought there was only about 19% that were non-behavioral, while we upped that to 28%. And again, that gets to those points where the things are so egregious that infrastructure can't really influence it. And then for the serious injuries, we went from about 38% to 47%. And that's information that we use in our next steps as well. So now we're trying to look at and understand how to use this information, and we have a way that we assess projects, and we look at this expected improvement reduction for projects, and we define that using a crash modification factor. You guys have probably heard about that. That's what we use for Smart Scale and the HSIP projects. There's a lot of research and a clearinghouse for these crash modification factors. So based on certain types of crashes, we have an expected benefit and an expected reduction. So the crash modification factor, though, is the ratio of the expected crashes that would be reduced after the infrastructure is installed. And so if we had a crash modification factor of a 0.75, we would expect a 25% reduction in crashes. So that's kind of how we use that information. When they create these crash modification factors, it's really an average of information. But now what we can do is take that information, we can start applying the behaviors that we've observed through this analysis, and we can modify that crash modification factor, so an adjustment factor that goes into that based on the behaviors. One of the things that we know from the crash reports, we can see that sometimes there's multiple behaviors that are involved in a crash. And so we multiply those behavioral effects when there are multiple. We have found again that if you get more than 2 adverse behaviors, it's again, infrastructure probably can't do much to influence that. So the purpose of a lot of this was really trying to understand that interaction between the behavioral aspects and the infrastructure improvements and what we can do through infrastructure to reduce the severity of the behavior. So step 2, we always talked about a deep dive. And this is really where a lot of effort went into the work that's been done over the last 6 months, because we needed information from this to move forward in our future steps, our next steps. This was a lot of effort, and it's all boiled down to one slide. So basically, we looked at 2,000 of that 40,000 plus 38,000 crash reports. We did a statistical random sampling of these. We did focus our study on intersections. So that's a pretty known population. We know a lot about the intersections. It's also a little narrowly defined, so it gives us some good information at first cut at trying to look at and understand the information from these crash reports. So for each of these crash reports, we dug into them and did this deep dive and looked at each of those crash reports, identified the behaviors using those new definitions, and looked at a pre-crash scenario, or the typology. So what happened? Was a run-off-the-road type crash. And we're able to then identify 73 different countermeasures that could be utilized as an infrastructure improvement to help reduce the severity of that crash. And so when we're looking at that, we're then combining that crash modification factor for those 73 different typologies, and we're applying our behavioral adjustment factor. So you'll see that moving forward. One of the key outputs, though, from this step was development of this template that now allows us to quickly analyze other projects, and we used it for analysis of existing projects. So a lot of work went into this.
Mr. Kasprowitz.
Just a question on the step 2. So the 2,000 randomly selected crashes that you looked at, you just used the police reports? Is that the principal?
Crash reports,
And
yes.
did you find them to be consistent and have the information that you needed available in all reports?
No, that is a challenge that the crash reports have been getting better historically as far as the information that's included and the consistency that we're seeing. And so that's definitely a challenge. We try to limit any kind of real assumptions that you're making, but there are times when you would have to make assumptions. There are a certain number of those crash reports that we would have excluded from further analysis, either having insufficient information or that it was one of those things where it was obviously drunk. So again, we know that we can't influence, or we presume that we can't influence our severity of the crash through an infrastructure improvement.
As we go forward using this tool, it may benefit this process to do some outreach to law enforcement and look for perhaps some consistency in the approach. I know there's a wide variability in department.
And it's my understanding that DMV has led efforts in training enforcement officers to improve the input of the data. I'm not certain whether they're continuing with that effort. It's certainly something that we can look at and move forward with as a recommendation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Oops.
This is of special interest to me in this regard. About 6 months ago at one of our I-81 public meetings, I had occasion to ask the head of the Truckers Association about any information that he may have with regard to truck crashes on I-81. And to my surprise, he shared with me data that they had that I don't think we had seen. I subsequently shared it with the commissioner. But what it showed was that with serious accidents and fatalities on I-81, there was a large proportion of truck involvement. And subsequently, in just looking at it, it looked to me like a large portion of that had to do with behavioral issues. Led me to believe that, well, I wonder how do we modify behavioral of a truck driver, and my conclusion was that comes with education from the employer, which is only going to be incentivized to do it with some sort of additional fine. My question to you is, with this type of process and the capability that we have, can we and will you apply this to our truck issues on 81? I think this is going to be important, if not this year, certainly in future years, as we try to defend our insistence that trucks play a larger proportion of the cost of the improvement of 81.
Right. And I do know that the crash reports contain information about the vehicles involved in the crash, so it's something certainly we could look at. I wasn't involved in the studies that we did for I-81, and so I can follow back up with you all on some more information on whether it makes sense to tweak the models that we look for as we look forward into understanding the influence of the trucks in the fatalities that we're seeing, and maybe not just limited to the 81 corridor, that we're looking at that elsewhere. So I agree, I think it is a significant issue, and I do believe that we had some work done through that I-81 report that addressed the crashes and the cause of the crashes. As far as the behavioral aspects, you know, again, that's a little bit more the purview of the DMV, and that was part of their task here. And while we've made some headway on behavioral analysis and really the effectiveness of the programs that are existing, we still have some more work to do on that. And you know, we talk about kind of the 4 E's, and one of those key ones is education. And so I think that is a huge component that we need to continue to educate. I don't know what driver education type programs exist other than through training that they do.
Now, excuse me, Margie, I just will add to Mr. Whitworth's comment and to what you were saying. This past year, the Research Council did a report, a study on whether or not Virginia would participate in a federal pilot with trucks more than 91,000 pounds. And as part of the study, they were looking at, you know, crash data, safety issues involving trucks. And I think some of the data in that report could be helpful in addressing some of these questions. I know part of the recommendation was the standardization of how these crashes are actually reported and capturing the road conditions, the infrastructure conditions along the road. So Kathy McGee may actually be another really good resource.
Great. So that was step 2, and again, that was the...
May I say, you look very alert, and it's so pretty to hear the music. Gosh.
Shall we sing?
Thank you, Mr. Whitworth. Kind of just set a different tone.
No, it was a heavenly moment.
We are all happier immediately. Shifting behavior, Mr. Williams.
Yes. Shifting behavior, encouraging.
Encouraging, yes. Incentivizing.
Positive affirmations. Okay, step 3 is where we actually looked at projects, and we wanted to understand the expected benefits of the projects. We do, just traditionally, we do a lot of analysis of before an infrastructure project is installed and then post after an infrastructure improvement is installed. But typically we like 3 to 5 years of data after to really see the effectiveness of that. That's where we use these crash modification factors. What is the expected reduction, the expected benefits of a project? But we were able to identify 96 projects that through this time frame of January 2017 to March 2019. And when we're looking at developing our predictive model and the baseline conditions, this time frame was selected as projects that would be completed that could be influencing our expected reductions that the model wouldn't necessarily account for yet based on the data years that we have available for model development. And so we identified 20 smart scale projects and 76 highway safety improvement program projects. It's about $320+ million of improvements that we're looking at here, and scheduled for completion or are complete already. We use some methodology for identifying these types of projects as well relative to the smart scale program. For the pre-crash history information, we looked at the crash years of 2010 to 2017, and through that time period, we can see how many crashes we had for these projects in that time period. So when we now take that information and we apply our crash modification factor that is adjusted for these behavioral factors, we can see that there's a projected reduction to 128 fatalities over that crash period. And so that's a reduction of 10, of a benefit of 10, and so we annualize that, so it's 1.3 per year. So now these were for spot improvement projects. I should have highlighted that a moment ago. Our spot and corridor improvement projects tend to be a little bit more expensive, targeted at a specific location, and usually for a specific crash history that is present at that time. But so we did this for, obviously, for our fatality, serious injuries, and our bike ped populations. So now, in just looking at a project example of a spot project, it's Route 620 at the Route 1 intersection in Spotsylvania County. This was about a $22 million project. There were no fatalities at this project, but there were about 22 serious injury crashes over the 8-year crash history. And there, you can also see that there's several features added to this project that are all addressing various crash types. And so when we look at this project and we analyze it, we can apply these crash modification factors with our behavioral factor applied for the various treatments that would be appropriate for this project. And again, we end up with a reduction of about 6 crashes, serious injury crashes, through that time period, and annualized, that gives us that 0.75 per year. So now we have the other side of the house, which is the systemic projects. So these are projects that are funded through our HSIP program. They are low-cost type projects. They are typically spread out over a much larger geographic area. They tend to be very low cost. They range between $1,000 to $10,000 per mile or per location. So it might include things like the backplates on the lights, chevrons, not guardrail. Guardrail's still considered something on our spot improvements, but the rumble strips too are a key feature that we use for these systemic type projects. So we had 29 projects for a value of about $30 million, and this is the crash data that we have during that time period from those crash years. So again, we apply our crash modification factors adjusted for those behaviors, and we see a reduction of about 41 fatalities over that crash period at a rate of 5.1 per year, and serious injuries about 10 times that at 450. And so we can see that these systemic type projects tend to be a little bit more effective than the spot improvements and are usually a lower cost solution. So an example of the systemic type project is Centerline Rumble Strips. This was a Hampton Roads project. It's $1.1 million. We covered 63 miles. So we can really see that this project alone had some significant benefits for the cost that we have here. So I think that was while we knew this, I think this analysis really kind of highlights the value and the benefits associated with systemic projects. Now we wanted to combine all of our project expected reductions for those projects. So this includes our spot improvements and the systemic projects. And we can see the total expected reductions would be about 6.4 fatalities per year and about 70 serious injuries per year. So we'll eventually apply this to our expected targets when we look at our modeling results. So in step 4 really gets to the model. We had to develop the model, but we wanted to understand the various external factors that could influence the fatal and serious injuries, crashes that are occurring. So we needed to understand the combinations and or just the total external risk factors. We looked at a lot of these things on a district-wide basis. One, the data was available at that, but 2 is that also gives us some insight then on variability that occurs across the state by district. We looked at a lot of other data sets. We had some data constraints based on the years of availability of the data. We wanted a consistent time period for which we were looking at. And so the coverage of this was 2009 to 2017. So a lot of good information we had from that. So we used this information, and we built, using a regression model, we applied these various factors, variables, and really kind of work until our projected values equal our observed values. And we do that to within a certain confidence limit. You can see that we're at about 90% in this, this analysis. For an initial cut at this model, we felt like that was really good. We know that there's other variables and information that we want to look at and apply to this model down the line, so we think that we can improve it. But as far as a first cut at the model development, we felt this was really good. We created separate models for both the serious injuries and for our non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. So what, just kind of broadly across those three models, these are some of the key observations as far as the variables that are impacting and influencing our crashes the most. So really it's the it's the local collector and minor arterial roadways that we're seeing a higher increase in VMT that are causing some of these crashes, or that's the result of it. We're also seeing demographic issues here. We definitely see some influences from our younger drivers with maybe more risk-taking and maybe distracted, but also the aging population that we're seeing some severe crashes. We also saw, and especially when we started looking at the district level, we can see where snowfall has a significant impact. People tend not to drive as much when we have snow. They're driving a little slower, so the severity of the crashes may be less. We also have the issue, not surprisingly, in that really in the rural areas, while we might have an increase in rural VMT, we're also not seeing as many non-motorized type crashes. So these were just high level, some of the key observations we were able to pull. But using this baseline model and aligning it, we're also then able to use it in a predictive capability. And actually, I should have highlighted too that with the model development, that was through 2017. Then we used the first half of 2018 to validate the model, and that was presented in that other graphic that I had a moment ago. So the model validation worked well. Certainly moving forward, we'll continue to update the model with the 2018 throughout the year. But what we see here is our prediction for 2019 for fatalities at 896. With that confidence interval of 90%, there's still some variability that would be expected there. Did this for the other, for the serious injuries and for our non-motorized crashes. So this table just summarizes those results. So the top row there are the predictive model results that we have for each of the crash types. And then we have the expected benefits from our projects that we looked at. So our step 3 projects, so you can see that we would subtract that from the baseline model results, and we get down to that revised 2019 target. That bottom row of the table there are the numbers that you all approved and adopted back in July. So we can see that based on what we adopted, which, you know, the 840 that we selected at that time was kind of trying to hold things flat. We looked at trend lines to kind of get to those numbers, but tried to be a little bit realistic in that. But we can still see that our model projections, and really it's the trends that are driving that model, are still increasing. So VMT, population, you know, the demographic changes that we're seeing, those things are still increasing. So we do see an increase in the fatality rate, and then a decrease, as we've been seeing anyway, through the serious injuries. And then when we look at the combined of the fatalities and serious injuries for the bike ped, it's still the fatalities that are driving that number up, not the serious injury crashes. So this methodology, I think, has been a very helpful tool for us. It's very much a data-driven process to get to those targets rather than using like a 5-year rolling average, which was what had been planned or what was recommended through FHWA and NHTSA. So I think that this really gives us, Nick highlighted that this is something that others haven't done. So we really think that this is something that hopefully we'll be sharing and getting some peer review as well, so that we can get some additional feedback. But I think this really is kind of cutting edge for us as far as a different way to try to come to those numbers and be more realistic with it. So what are our key findings out of all of this? Most of our external factors are increasing. We did see that there's a significant benefit from the systemic type projects and at a lower cost. Distracted driving. I didn't speak a lot to the data behind that, but distracted and drunk driving are actually lumped together as impaired driving, and it used to be always that alcohol kind of rose to the top as impaired driving, and what we're seeing is distracted is starting to take that over, and it's almost like becoming the new alcohol. So the distracted is definitely increasing, but we got to remember distracted isn't just texting. It's also, you know, changing your radio station. It's talking to the person beside you. There's many other things that play into distracted. We also have the demographics, so we definitely see that the younger drivers are influencing our crashes, and then the older drivers, and that's a growing demographic, and so that would be something that is still driving that. So next steps. We want to continue to evaluate those project investments. We've already been working with VDOT as we look at the current investment strategies. Over the last few years, they've already been investing additional funding from the HSIP program into the systemic type projects. So they've been trending that way anyway, so we want to continue to do some analysis. While there's a lot of value to improving the systemic, bottom line is what we see through these improvements. It really comes down to geographic coverage. The more area that we can cover and add these safety treatments, the better benefits we're going to have, whereas an intersection type of improvement, that spot improvement, tends to be more expensive, so you need lots of those to have the same benefit as a systemic type improvement, and that just cost makes it a little bit difficult. I mentioned the behavioral programs. We think that there's still work to be done there that we can improve, and then start adding that into our model so that we can start understanding the behavioral aspects in the model and looking at, we have a long list of other external risk factors that we'd like to look at, see if we can get the data that's out there for it, and start adding that into the models to see if that refines our model and that we can really use that a little bit better. So we're planning to continue moving forward with this model approach, update it for the 2018 data, and develop our new future baseline conditions off of that update, and develop 2020 targets. We would plan to present those targets to you all this spring, probably in the April timeframe, for adoption at the May meeting, such that the DMV has that information so they can do their reports to FHWA in that time. One quick observation about 2018 data. We know that the numbers have come in a little lower than expected. I think you all have been hearing that we were trending very much with 2017. It does look like we're a little bit lower than that. We won't have all of that information. There's some time, a lag in gathering all that data. But we think that that'll help us as far as our model predictions, as far as kind of helping to lessen the steepness of the curve as we look at our predictive capabilities. So there's what we've been able to do over the last 6 months. Questions?
Excellent report. So, thoughts, questions?
I just wanted to, I guess, echo your sentiments. This is exceptional work. I have to say that since the start of our work on Smart Scale, we've been uncertain of the impact that we have on safety in consideration of just lack of information and knowing that many of the causes are beyond our ability to control or impact. And you've done an exceptional job of quantifying this. A couple questions, though. Did the methodology for this come from our internal sources? Did we develop this program?
Did. Let me rephrase that. There was some studies by the Texas Transportation Institute that had done some analysis, and we looked at some of the model that they used, and we built off of that.
Again, I commend you. It's an exceptional study. The second question is the benefit of the information that we gathered in analyzing the 2,000 crashes. Are there other agencies within the state that would benefit from having access to that information from a standpoint of things like speed control with the state police? Is there an opportunity to use this perhaps beyond just our needs or our uses and have a bigger impact on safety?
It's a great question. I think where I see some interconnectivity between some of these things is one of the ITTF projects that was presented yesterday is the one in Northern Virginia where they're going to build this database and pull this data together. And a lot of that is trying to get into predictive capabilities as well as far as where the crash is going to occur, so that maybe I could deploy some sort of treatment or have my police sitting on the side waiting for the crash to happen. It doesn't necessarily prevent the crash there, but I do see some synergies between those type of aspects, and so we've already been talking a little bit to both Hari and Kathy about some of that.
What about the specific issue of speeding?
So I think enforcement still is a major issue there as far as really trying to make a difference with that. And I think that Kathy even highlighted yesterday another one of the projects, how it was the one outside of Nevada where they piloted it and actually had a police car sitting there with its lights on without anybody in it. So I think that there's still some things that can be done there. Working on the behavioral side, though, I think is key. So as far as what we're doing in trying to do predictive capabilities, we're always kind of looking at what's happened and trying to solve some of those problems. What we're doing isn't necessarily getting to the speed. I think one of the areas that we have talked about in the past is maybe we need to rethink some of our design approaches, such that we would look as we go to make an improvement to a project, to an area, that we would look at the crash history and say, do we need to redesign it maybe to slow things down? I think I presented some examples in July of the road diet type approach, where it helps with certain types of crashes.
I guess that's one approach. I mean, what we'd be doing is compensating for inappropriate behavior, I guess, to some extent. I'm not sure that's the direction we'd want to take. But excellent study, and it really, I think, is there an equivalent nationally? Has anybody done it to this?
To our knowledge.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great work. Thank you.
Madam Secretary, to feed off of Mr. Caspert's comments, certainly we're leading the nation in this work that we're doing. We're taking, as we started some of the conversation yesterday about the workforce of tomorrow and data as the new oil, taking a holistic look at the crashes, the interaction between the behavioral side, and now wanting to interject potentially location of ABC stores and other things that we have not looked at in the past, and what could be drivers associated with crashes, and maybe there are contributing factors that we have not looked at or considered in the past. Certainly looking at the potential for driving the numbers down, I think what Margie has shown from at least these results are clear indications that maybe we need to be refocusing ourselves in how we're allocating the HSIP monies today, and taking a much more broader look at, instead of spot improvements, looking at the systemic improvements that are going to drive those numbers down if we're really going to look at how our infrastructure numbers are trending. So this might be something that we want to work with the district engineers on, look at those trends and what are those systemic improvements that can really make a larger impact, and get those implemented at a much faster rate than what we would see as a spot single improvement. We're working with the state traffic engineer and his team to be able to look at that, look at the monies that we have allocated thus far, and then identify the opportunity to reprogram them into such things as the rumble strips and centerline rumble strips, or backplates, or flashing yellow arrow opportunities that have a high impact, quick return on the investment. So those are the things that I think we need to continue. But I see not only what the safety performance measures have been working on in this case, but also looking at this in potentially our maintenance program, our bridge program, and look at the data in a new way that we haven't thought of in the past. And that's going back to maybe potentially hiring data scientists to be able to look at these ways of thinking that are going to drive our investment decisions moving forward.
Mr. Smoot.
Thank you. What sources of funding are available outside of Smart Scale to specifically address safety-related projects?
In particular, it's the Highway Safety Improvement Program that is a federal program that's outside of the Smart Scale project.
And it's about $50 million a year, and it's about $50 million per year.
Mm-hmm. To Virginia?
To Virginia.
Okay.
We'll just point out that safety is a part of our metrics in looking at every project that goes through Smart Scale for new construction. So it's always been an important factor.
And I think just adding to the Smart Scale aspect, and I think I highlighted that we'll continue to evaluate investment strategies. Nick has brought this up before too, is when we look at safety being so important to us, is the percentages that we're using for our different area types appropriate for that. And so we are still looking at that. And so I think through this next spring, as we look at changes to Smart Scale, we'll have taken that additional look at the safety component of Smart Scale, and just to provide any recommendations that we think would be appropriate based off of that additional analysis. So that is very much one of the next steps moving forward for us as well.
I'll just add two things. In the 81 improvement plan, there were 4 areas that we were going to continue to work on, one of which was operations and technology, because it's not something that ends, it's something that we would do on an ongoing basis. And so looking at these decisions will become an integral part of looking at along 81. And then, as the commissioner said, building it into other decisions that we're making through Smart Scale, state of good repair, maintenance. So just trying to integrate this information. I will also say that this administration has placed such a high focus on highway safety. There have been a lot of firsts this year on distracted driving, the work of Quentin Elliott and Deputy Secretary Bryant Washington working together with the help of Marshall Herman and your leadership on that team. We had the first the directive from the governor on setting up a leadership team on highway safety, the first town hall on highway safety. But I really think that the group, this leadership, this executive leadership team that's been put together with transportation and public safety, this presentation should actually go to this group, because as they are working on legislative and policy proposals, I think having this information would be extremely helpful and allow us to plan for, are there legislative changes? Are there things we can do in education and our driver's ed programs? How do we supplement, make all this work together?
Secretary?
Ms. Hines.
So as I'm listening to Margie, first of all, I'm just really impressed. This is a wonderful way to tease this all apart and learn from it. So thank you all so very much. But as I'm sitting here listening, one of the thoughts that's running through my mind is, how is my district different from this broader state look that you've given us? And so, and of course in my district, we have another funding entity that's building a lot of roads. And so one of the questions I have is first of all, could we see our district specific if it's statistically valid? I don't know whether it would be at this point. And then the second question is, as you continue to build this out, might you share it with MPOs in some organized manner so that the people who are sitting at those tables begin to understand? Because I think it's a really important takeaway that the systemic ones do more for safety overall than the spot improvement. I think when you're in a jurisdiction, you get real focused on that one intersection that might have, 2 accidents a year or 1 accident every 2 years. And yet there's that rumble strip idea or some other kinds of things that could actually make a lot of people more safe. So I would just say, let's, if we could think about that, I think would be really good information.
Secretary, Ms. Hines, what I'd say is that we do have a part of the safety performance measures being a federal requirement. We have been working with the MPOs and the localities to be able to help them if they're willing to set their own performance targets, how are we setting ours, and then educating them on how to do it or what our process is. Secondarily, every year when we go through the planning process for the safety projects, our staff generates a list of potential locations that have the potential for safety improvements, as well as known crash histories, but also looking at a predictive model as to where crashes may exist based upon certain factors. And those are shared with each of the district engineers and the localities at that point in time to help generate the potential for projects, and recognizing that systemic projects are a very viable option that can be used successfully to drive down those numbers.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
One more comment. I just want to circle back to conversations we had yesterday on the ITTF funding.
Yes.
And one of the components of all the projects was the creation of a uniform data platform. And I could just see many applications in the future as we start to unify these data sets where, to the commissioner's comment, we can look at data in ways that we haven't been able to before. Will be very meaningful in reducing fatalities and serious injuries. So it's a very integrated process we're starting to develop, and I commend all who are involved in it. Great work.
Thank you very much. And let me just make sure I have the kudos to the Traffic Engineering Division, Mark Cole and Stephen Reed, under the leadership of Ray Curry. I mean, they've done some phenomenal work with all of this. They are quite the subject matter experts, and I appreciate all their support as well. So thank you very much.
Margie, thank you, gentlemen. Before I go on to the director and commissioner's reports, I want to just touch base with our subcommittees. So, Mr. Williams, do you have an update for us on?
Oh, yes.
On your subcommittee?
As all of you are aware, the governor and Secretary Valentine asked us to convene a committee of folks to look at our utility relocation process that we do on every project. We had a great group. We've got all the major utilities, Dominion, Verizon. We've got many of the more rural utilities involved. We've got two of the largest, I think two of the only, and they cover all the contractors associations. Local government associations are involved. And we've had the expertise of our chief engineer, Garrett, and Rob Carey, and Julie Brown, who knows local government, our process with local government better than anyone, and Matt Reynolds, who runs the underground utility relocation process for VDOT. And last but not least, we've had our tremendous lawyer, Rick Walton, who we've not put a lot of pressure on because, you know, his daughter's getting married. He's got to pay for it. And I'd recommend all of you that interact with him to just don't put too much more stress on him. The perception in the
There
industry.
you are in the back of the room. Did you see me? I'm searching around the podium.
That's why I said it. The perception is that the relocation of underground utilities in just about every project, it turns out to be a disaster. That's what we all hear. It tears the schedule all to pieces. We end up with a sloppy mess. And what we found out is, in our first meeting, is the utilities unanimously said when it's a design bid build, which is where VDOT goes in ahead of the letting, gets the utilities relocated, and then they let the job out for bidding. There was no problem, and the utilities unanimously said it. We don't have a problem with VDOT doing utility relocations. Where the problems were coming up is in the local administrative projects because the process changed, or design build, which is many of our major projects where we have the most complex utility relocation projects oftentimes. And I mean, it boiled down to, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it boiled down to that Matt's group had developed a handbook that they went by, and that they, you know, everything they did was by that handbook. The utilities were aware of it, and it works. So where we're heading, we need two more. I think we need two more meetings, maybe only one more. We'll bring a report for a recommendation back to the CTB in March. But what we're aiming for is to add further, enhance the handbook that Matt's currently using. And then where the policy change is going to have to take place at the CTB is we determined we can, I would hope Rick Walton would nod his head, and that we will require those localities who want to locally administer projects, it's passed through money from the federal government through this board, or it comes directly from the Commonwealth through this board, that they will adopt and use the handbook and the recommendations in the handbook. The handbook is, and we also do the same thing on our design build contracts. We would have it in the contract that this is, we tell them everything else in the design build procedure. There's nothing wrong with telling them and use this handbook. Somewhere you're going to capture the accountability of who messes up. I mean, sometimes the contractor can do a perfect job of calling at the right time, getting all the work that they have to do before it gets passed along to here, and then a natural disaster occurs, and Dominion's got 3,000 people down in Florida cleaning up after a hurricane. It happens, but most of it's avoidable. The utility industry is, I think, they're enthusiastic about it. The road builders are very enthusiastic about it. I'm not sure if local government's enthusiastic about it, but they'll get that way.
Thank goodness we have Ms. Brown.
I think Julie pointed out many things. We need more training. We need to be able to train these folks because a lot of the communities aren't perhaps not sophisticated enough to have people that are trained in this that are locally administered projects. But we're going to come back with a good set of recommendations. I think February will be our hopefully last meeting. March we'll come back and hopefully we'll adopt a policy change here that gets the ball rolling.
Thank you so much for taking this. This has been a long-term issue and problem, so thank you very much. Any questions, thoughts? Okay, thank you very much. We'll look forward to next month. Let's see, technology. I guess without Mr. Connor at the as chair, I do hope maybe at the next meeting we could elect one. But
Recommended Mr. Yates at last meeting. And he raised no objection, so I think he's kind of a
I will announce that Mr. Yates is now.
That was before yesterday's presentation. He agreed.
Yeah, Allison, that's what I heard.
Exactly.
Supposed to recommend people that aren't here.
So I will direct this to Ms. DeTonk, Mr. Yates, Mr. Katzwitz, anything that you would like to add to the discussion or the presentation yesterday, or anything that happened in your subcommittee. Okay.
It was my first meeting, but
I guess just, yeah.
Oh, good.
it was very cutting edge. I think there's some really cool things that we're delving into. They're very cutting edge that you'll see fruition and
I guess there is one thing, Madam Secretary. Mr. Dixon made the comment yesterday that what he was looking for us to say in the presentation of the ITTF projects is that we were not new to those, that we had been essentially working through many of those issues and those projects for several years. So we did have a long history and track record, and I guess we failed to say that in our description of why we thought they were appropriate projects to fund.
I would like to add that. I think it's important, certainly based on yesterday's feedback, that that we're bringing more of the discussion from the committees to the full board. So everybody's apprised of where what's being discussed and what our issues and concerns are.
And I think that was my reaction as well. If you've been a part of the committee, these seem like a natural outgrowth of 2 years of work. But that's why I think getting the committee reports, making sure the full board is aware and on board with direction is really key. So anyway, so every month we will do this, and I'll look forward to whoever's going to be chair of the committee.
Madam Secretary, may I just add one more comment? I would just like to extend thanks to Mr. Connors for his work. He really spearheaded this committee, really had the vision for it, and really got it started. So really appreciate the couple of years of efforts put forth to make this happen. It's come a long way.
Thank you. We're not done with Mr. Connors yet, but yes, thank you you are so right. With that, Director Mitchell, your report and perhaps a rail update from yesterday. Oh, you weren't there.
Yeah,
It was such a great
I was there
meeting.
at the end. I actually had to present to the House Transportation Committee yesterday during our rail subcommittee, but I was there for the last half hour
Yes.
or so. We did do a year, sort of a look ahead for all of the major milestones that we see coming up in the next year for transit and rail, of which there are very many. I won't go through all of them, but we do expect to, at least on the rail side, to see some big developments with Long Bridge and the EIS there, and hopefully getting a record of decision from FRA on our DC to RVA project. We're a little concerned right now with the effects of the shutdown, if that's going to hold that up much. But one thing I do want to point out as far as reporting back on a pretty big milestone for us is related to the Metro Safety Commission. And we actually hit a big milestone at the end of December with the Metro Safety Commission. Right now, there's a transition process underway. As you may recall, this is the new interstate compact that's overseeing safety of the Metro rail system that we set up last year. We have to get this group certified by the Federal Transit Administration by April of 2019, or the state stands to have 100% of our federal funds withheld. That would actually be for Virginia, DC, and Maryland. So it's a big priority for us. But there was a big milestone at the end of last month where in the transition process, there was a period where we had the Metro Safety Commission shadowing FTA's inspectors, and at the end of last month, we actually reversed that. So now the MSC staff are actually conducting the oversight with that FTA shadowing them. And so that's sort of the last step that was required as far as getting certified by FTA. So we're keeping an eye on the government shutdown again. The staff that are involved in this are not working right now. Related to the shutdown as well, we actually sent out a letter this month. We had heard from a couple transit systems within the Commonwealth that they were, because unlike Federal Highway Administration, FTA actually is mostly, I think they're 88% of the staff are furloughed, and so people are not able to draw down federal funds right now from FTA, which is different, I think, from FHWA, who's, they're all fully staffed right now. But so we have actually informed all of the transit agencies in the state that we're going to be forwarding our next 2 months of state funding to all of the transit systems, so that if they need to draw down on those state funds, because they can't access their federal funds, that they can do that. And so we just sent out a letter. We're making sure that everybody knows that that's available to them as well. On the rail side, I do just want to note that we got our ridership numbers for, actually it's the end of November, but very good results. We actually saw on a year-over-year increase, ridership increasing by 5% statewide. That's 6% on the Lynchburg and Roanoke route. We had a 4.5% growth on the Newport News route, 7.8% on our Norfolk route, which is very exciting because we are looking to start a second route there soon. And Richmond also saw a 2.4% increase. So we're very pleased to see those ridership increases. We were a little worried earlier in the year because of some drops that we were seeing, but it's good to see that it's actually rebounded. So that's it for my report.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Okay, thank you to those who serve on the Rail Committee. Commissioner?
I only have two items of what I think are of interest today, one of which is the quick update on the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel expansion project and giving a timeline for the next steps over the next 3 months leading up to hopefully a successful contract execution. So yesterday was the due date for the technical proposals from the two teams. I'm happy to report both of those technical proposals were submitted on time before the deadline, so we still have two teams that are vying for that project. February 8th is the date that we will be anticipating the submissions of the cost proposals, and that will be due by 5 p.m. on Friday, February 8th. So shortly thereafter, we'll have announced who that the contractor is going to be at that point in time and what the final cost is.
Mr. Williams.
You used the time starting, I guess, last night to February 8th to do the technical evaluations.
We will start the review of the technical proposals to make sure that they meet the RFP intent, and then, yes, we'll have the scores prior to the cost proposals being submitted. Yes. So after February 8th, we will be bringing a presentation back to you at the February board meeting on the content of the proposals, the cost proposals, the evaluation, and leading up to the March meeting for a resolution for you to take action to be able to allow me to execute a contract if it is within the price point, along with our funding partners of HR TAC. So the next 3 months, we do have a lot of work to be able to work through, not only on the technical proposal review, the cost proposal, but also working with our funding partners within HR TAC to be able to have an agreement with them to be able to execute between us and them for the $3.562 billion worth of work. So. And just the final one is an update on our smart scale at-risk projects. We're still working with a number of our localities. That's why we did not have a presentation this month. We think that we've been able to successfully rescope and re-engineer a number of those projects that were technically at risk to be able to bring those costs back down in line with the original purpose of the project. So I'm anticipating if I don't have a presentation in February, then I'll have your first quarterly update of where those smart scale projects are at the March meeting. But at this point, we don't see them at risk. And if they were at risk, we're certainly re-engineering them to bring them back in line with those cost estimates that were originally submitted. So.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? I have 3 items, one being very brief. But the first thing is I would just like to build on the words of the Commissioner regarding Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. It is an incredibly important infrastructure project in our Commonwealth. And as the Commissioner has indicated, we are in the midst of an active procurement, technical proposals yesterday, cost proposals on February 8th. As we are moving through this process of selecting a contractor, we on this board are going to have some challenging decisions to make as well. I am just saying this to you in preparation for a presentation we're going to make to you in February with a vote in March. And part of the discernment and decisions that we will be making are really because so many priorities are actually converging at one time. One being the fact that, well, I would say priorities and realities are converging all at one time. One, limited dollars. Two, vital structures that we in this room know are those structures that are safe, but we know that their end of life will be coming due probably in the next 5 to 15, 20 years. Our State of Good Repair program and how those dollars are used and being managed given the fact that there is a slow and steady decline. And the fact that Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel is the largest design build in Virginia's history, one of the largest, maybe the largest in the United States. And I say that not just because of the scope and the scale of the project. I say that because of the magnitude of how just important it is that we get this project done, and it is done with excellence. So it is really, really that important. So as we are working through the technical evaluations, the cost proposals coming forward, we met last Friday with Chairman Jones, Chris Jones, and the team from Hampton Roads, with our team here in the Commonwealth, negotiating the term sheets as all this is going forward. I do feel as though I need to really express gratitude to Chairman Jones for his leadership. Kevin Page, a number of their attorneys meeting with us, because this partnership between the Commonwealth and the region is vital. So we are going to be moving through a number of decision points over the next 2 months. And so I just say to you that in February you will be briefed on this, and I hope that we are able to come to a decision that is the best for those who live and work in Hampton Roads and for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So,
Chairman.
Mr. Miller.
I think it's important that that we have a broad picture of what we're trying to accomplish with this project. You know, we are the home of the Port of Virginia, which has been wildly successful in the last number of years and should continue to be. It's very important that we do what we need to do to keep that economic engine running. We're home to the world's largest naval base, and when we came across the bridge tunnel on the way over here yesterday, there are 4 aircraft carriers of our 11 sitting there that defend our country. We have all sorts of other, we talk about the naval base, but there's all sorts of military installations, from Oceana to Langley to Eustis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a heavy concentration of the folks that keep us safe in the world. Tourism is incredibly important to our region's economy. And so I don't sort of look at this, even though I live in that region, as a regional project. It's a project for the Commonwealth. It's very important for the Commonwealth. Having said that, I think it's also important that we remember that because of lots of frustration over many years of not having funding at the state level, the legislature ultimately allowed us to raise our own money in Northern Virginia and in Hampton Roads. And we both have taxed ourselves, our citizens, if you will, extra taxes so that we can do what the Commonwealth was not able or willing at the legislative level to do statewide. So the citizens of Hampton Roads, because that's what I'll speak to in terms of this project, are taxing themselves billions of dollars, billions. And the $200 million that is coming through on the smart scale score for this bridge tunnel is extremely important. Okay, it's extremely important. Having said that, there's billions of dollars of local money or regional money that is helping. The $200 million is being loaded on top of. So the region is still doing the vast majority of that project, as well as most of the other projects that we're doing in Hampton Roads, and Northern Virginia has similar situations. So when I look at this, and I know it's going to be a heavy lift, it's a big piece of smart scale, I understand that, but I see it as a critical project for the Commonwealth, not for Hampton Roads, and I'm I'm happy that the citizens of Hampton Roads are taking most of the burden of this project on themselves. And so I hope my colleagues will work together with us to finalize this and get it done, even though it is a big chunk of the money. It's just critically important. And you know, when somebody says, I'm willing to do 8/10 and I want you to do 2/10, or I'll do 9/10, you do 1/10, the Commonwealth gets a heck of a bang for their buck in terms of infrastructure and road improvements that gets handed over to them at the end of the project. I'd also like to thank you and folks on the staff and in the Secretariat for working closely with the folks in Hampton Roads. It hasn't always been easy, and I recognize that. We've got two entities between the TPO and TAC. They're new at this, if you will. It's not a mature organization. It's been around for 30 years. And I think we all need to do our best to work together at both the state level and the regional level to make sure this happens. And I'm confident that we will do that in Hampton Roads, and I'm confident that we'll do that in Richmond. And if we do continue down that road, we will have a fantastically impactful project for the Commonwealth, for Hampton Roads, and really for our country. So I appreciate all the work you've done in that regard.
Madam Secretary, I think Mr. Miller framed it up pretty well. He may have mentioned it, but I also would like to emphasize the importance of this facility to the port, and for that matter, for the quality of life of all the residents that live on both sides of that facility. It's been a challenge for a number of years, continues to be a challenge today. It's a very predictable congestion period, mornings and evenings. It impacts a lot of people in commerce and economic development. But we wouldn't be able to be here where we are today without us creating our own fund, our own HR TAC fund. And we need to sit back and think about what we have accomplished in a very short period of time in terms of the high-rise bridge construction, the 64 expansion, this 64-264 split. All those projects are in play, but it took a lot of coordination and effort between HR TAC because it was joint projects in terms of funding. This project has an enormous amount of complexity to it that requires all of us to roll our sleeves up and really try to figure out how to make this as seamless and practical as possible. When you're looking at the complexity of the road, the bridge, the tunnel, the hot network, it's going to be a very challenging period. So all of us working together to make this happen like we have on the other projects is absolutely critical. I'm sure we can do it, but the value that's going to be delivered to the region as well as the Commonwealth is going to be incredible. And as the previous governor said, we're going to unlock the region and expose ourselves to the opportunities that are beyond. So I'm excited about it.
Madam Chair, I wouldn't want to leave that without recognizing the importance of it to the military. I mean, they are constantly looking at options and ways to move around and better perform their mission, and projects like this are critical to those people. And when they see us doing it, if there's a scoring system, our points go way up with the military when they see us facilitating travel and evacuation and all those things that they take part in. So I think it's one of the top 3 issues that'll be dealt with by building this tunnel.
Just to piggyback on that and what Mr. Miller said, there's 4 carriers in port right now, and when there is 4 carriers, that morning commute increases dramatically. I went through that commute yesterday at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's a lot more traffic, a lot more challenging circumstances. One accident creates a total nightmare, and this solution with what we're doing with HRBT is going to go a long ways to fixing that. And very good point.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Marty.
Mr.
Madam
Johnson.
Secretary, if I may.
Yes.
I'd just like to comment on Shep Miller's comments and John Malvin's from that particular area and grew up there. I can remember riding across that body of water. The only way to get across was with a ferry boat. And needless to say, we've put 2 tunnels successfully in. We're looking to put 4 more lanes across an area that is materially significant to the Hampton Roads area and to the state of Virginia. We've got one of the best ports on the East Coast, which is growing significantly and continues to grow. Rail service is excellent. From an economic standpoint, the cooperation that's gone on within HR TAC and within the VDOT organization and the commissioner and the secretary, all the work you put into this, and what's going on in the legislature to be supportive of our efforts mutually. This is a critical asset, and it's a vital asset. It's one of the 25 that we recognize that may from time to time need some support, and I think we're giving that. Getting the $200 million is materially significant, and I just look forward to the continued cooperation to make this a vital asset that is on schedule and on budget with a solid relationship with the contractor. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and thank you all very, very much. And I do want to thank the commissioner and Mortese Farrajon and Nick Donahue. There's been a tremendous amount of work, and with the Attorney General's office, quite frankly, moving this all forward. You know, and regarding Smart Scale, it was the #1 project for congestion, the #1 project for accessibility. So it certainly earned that money through the Smart Scale process. And I did not know, just like we all didn't, we were in these negotiations and could never say that we knew it could be funded. We all compete through this process. So they certainly earned that recommendation yesterday. I will just say that when we come to you in February, our work is not done. So there will be more difficult decisions to make. And so anyway, just wanted to prepare you for that discussion. Following up with that a little bit, in March, our meeting will be in Hampton Roads, our CTB meeting. March 21st is a very important day, Mr. Commissioner, and with HR TAC, and so anyway, it's kind of a pivotal point for us. And so there's really 2 reasons. In full candor, I also have a personal commitment that I cannot miss, and so we're going to be doing a poll with everyone to see if we could shift our March meeting from Tuesday, Wednesday, which would be the 19th and 20th, to Wednesday, Thursday, the 20th and 21st. Just given the importance of the meeting, I would very much like to be there. And secondly, it would put our team in place to be there on the 21st. So there are many good reasons to do this, mine being secondary, of course. However, it would be very, very helpful. So we'll kind of finalize that for March, but did want to make you all aware. And then finally, as far as my remarks, I would like to give my time to our Vice Chairman, Mr. Whitworth, to make a presentation.
It's a resolution.
Yes.
Yes.
And Mr. Connor, do you mind coming up to the podium? So we can fully embrace this moment. Good morning.
Morning.
You were so good to sit. What is it like sitting out there?
It's great.
Yeah.
You talk.
You sure you're not involved?
Yeah.
Madam Secretary.
Whereas Henry L. Hap Connors Jr. served on the Commonwealth Transportation Board from 2014 to 2018, having been appointed to serve on the board by Governor Terry McAuliffe and subsequently reappointed by Governor Ralph Northam, and having served as a member representing the Fredericksburg Construction District, and whereas Mr. Connors' service on the board was distinguished by his commitment to advancing the use of technology in all facets of transportation in the Commonwealth, and his focus on providing access to data and information that would enhance safe and seamless navigation of state highways and rail systems. Whereas prior to his service, Mr. Connors served on the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors from 2003 to 2011, during which time he also represented the county as a member of the Fredericksburg Area Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Committee and served as the committee's chairman. And whereas Mr. Connors frequently sought input from community members and businesses, civic groups in the Fredericksburg area, Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula, to understand their unique transportation needs and perspectives, and attended numerous public hearings and meetings on projects in his district. And whereas Mr. Connors served as an advocate for unlocking gridlock in the Interstate 95 corridor and worked to advance more than $1 billion in Interstate 95 highway and rail corridor improvements that will keep people and commerce moving to drive our state economy forward. Whereas Mr. Connors brought to the board an extensive background in marketing and communications, including his work as Vice President for Government and Public Affairs for the Center of Innovative Technology, and as well as his work in communications for the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the U.S. General Services Administration. Whereas Mr. Connors, in fulfilling his duties with the board and as chair of Innovation and Technology Subcommittee, has demonstrated leadership, dedication, a clear vision for innovation in transportation, able to walk on water, no. Forthrightness and commitment, earning the respect and admiration of his colleagues and the staff of the Virginia Department of Transportation and the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. And whereas the board wishes to express its appreciation to Mr. Connors for his years of service to the Commonwealth, now therefore be it resolved that the members of the current board extend to Mr. Connors their highest recommendation and appreciation for his years of outstanding service on behalf of the citizens of the Commonwealth as a member of the board, and express their best wishes to him. I so make this motion.
All those in favor? Or should I say any further discussion?
Just one comment. Shouldn't we gavel to the actual take the vote just for purposes of? Should we have to? I don't know.
Well,
Parliamentary requirement.
Madam Secretary, it's always good to have,
Mr. Walton?
it's always good to have a lawyer in town, right?
I just don't want to get in trouble for taking a vote. Well, we can vote.
I know. No. Oh, just the part about walking on water.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, we will, Mr. Walton, should we just adjourn the workshop and go right into our action meeting? Oh, Mr. Allen, you're right there. Yes? Yeah. Okay, so we're adjourning the workshop. We're convening the action meeting. Okay.
I'm back.
You're back. And do you all remember? Any additional comments?
I'd like to make a couple of comments, Madam Secretary. So 5 years ago, it's remarkable it's been that many years, HAP pursued former Secretary Lane to initiate this subcommittee, and I remember the discussions that went on. I would say that it took some work to convince Aubrey that this was necessary and appropriate. And HAP soon after asked if I would join it, and you were part of that as well, of course. And I think our initial reaction to the information that we're receiving on the use of ITTF funding was that it was perhaps operationally important, but didn't really rise to the level very often of what we call innovation and technology-driven. It's taken 5 years to, I think, turn that ship, and I have to credit HAP singularly with providing the inspiration and leadership to keep moving us forward with this. It is, it's a process that's evolved, I think, significantly under his leadership. And I have to say that the timing of this, the presentation of the ITTF projects yesterday, I think is a culmination of just his exceptional work and leadership. And I think we can all be very proud of that list of 13 projects that we'll be pursuing. And I have to say, I don't believe it would have happened without HAP's leadership. So I commend you. I have to say, we'll miss you, HAP. You've always pushed us forward. When we started to lag, you would bring us back to the importance of innovation, technology, and not settling, but looking at what the future of transportation is going to be. We will miss you. And I will say that your inspiration, I will assure you, will continue to drive and motivate us, and we will do our darn best to make you proud of the work that we do in the future. Thank you. It's been a great partnership, HAP, and I can't thank you enough for your leadership.
You're here. Anybody else?
I just want to make one comment and thank Hap for his work and his service on TSDEC, our Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee. It has been a very time-intensive effort over the past year. We've been meeting almost monthly for 4 or 5 hours at a time and going through a lot of very, very detailed technical information. HAP has been a very active member and contributed quite a bit to the discussion, not just in understanding all the details of the scenarios we were talking about, but also bringing a lot of sort of high-level insight and leadership on transit issues in general and the things that, policy goals that we needed to keep in place. So I do really appreciate all the work you put into that as well. So thank you.
Mr. Connor, I will just say, it's hard to believe that it's been 5 years, but we actually came in as a class. We had a large class. We had Marty Williams and Scott Kaswitz, Mr. Dyke, Jim Dyke, you and me. And so we kind of came in together. And so it's been just a remarkable team, but I just really want to thank you for your friendship and your trust and your leadership in being on this board. And I know that you're going to continue to work with many of us as you kind of move on to your new adventures, but it is something that I will personally always treasure and just really thank you for that. I do think I deserve a little bit of credit for attending a meeting with you. Trying to justify the technology committee. So you didn't have to go by yourself.
That helped a lot, thank you.
But I feel as though we have walked many miles to get to this moment, and just really want to thank you for that.
Thank you all, and I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to cry in a minute, but it's been an honor to serve on this board with all of y'all, and I think we have made some good reforms to better deliver transportation solutions today, but also laid a foundation for the future. And I'm really proud of that. And it's been a we thing. I appreciate the compliments, but it's been a we thing. This is a we thing, and this is a team effort. And I think all of us have done a good job working together to advance good transportation solutions. I think most importantly, as I get older, I also value the friendships I've made and relationships on this board. I've learned a lot about you all. I've learned, before you became secretary, we used to talk about time traveling in these meetings sometimes. And,
smart scale and time traveling, yes.
It's a great skill. I'm going to miss that conversation. I learned a lot about your talents. We've got two musicians here. We've got a trumpet player and an upright bass player. Maybe my replacement will play percussion or guitar. And then you can have the CTB players at every meeting. I've also learned about world records that some members hold. And I've learned about your families and your talents and your hobbies and your homes and your regions. I think that's the most important thing I take away from this. It's your friendship and this relationship is the most thing I treasure, and you've added a lot of richness to my life, and I thank you for that. It's been an honor.
Thank you. So, all is in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, we should have put in the resolution that you were the mentor to Mr. Dotson as well.
Well, that means anything, we have no idea.
We'll see.
Okay. Do I have a motion for the approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. Do we have anybody? No one has signed up for public comment this morning, but if there's anyone in the audience who would care to speak, we certainly invite you to come up. Okay. Ms. Brown. Good morning.
Madam Chairman, members of the board, I have one action item for you this month. I'll be asking for your approval of the annual revenue sharing deallocation. The deallocation process was implemented to try to make sure revenue sharing funds were being used effectively and were being used to move projects forward. This will be the 8th cycle that we've presented to the board for revenue sharing deallocation. Based on the criteria that the board has established, Local Assistance Division basically identified the projects that were candidates to be reviewed back in May, work with the districts to work with the localities on getting the status of these projects to finalize the list. The list of projects proposed for deallocation is in your board packet. There really should be no surprises. Every locality that had a project that was being proposed for deallocation did receive a letter in November letting them know that their project would be proposed for deallocation. There are more candidate projects that we're reviewing now based on the board's policy revisions back in July 2017, since there are more limits on transfers. The deallocated funds will be returned to the statewide account for redistribution in the future. We would ask for your approval of the proposed deallocation projects.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Oh, all those in favor, did y'all say aye? Okay, thank you. Mr. Farrajon, could you come here for 1 second? I'm sorry, I did get a little distracted just about something I need to take care of. Okay, Ms. Pryor.
Morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I have 2 items for your consideration today. The first is the amendment of 4 projects to the 6-year improvement program. 3 are safety projects and 1 is a study, and we recommend your approval.
Moved.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman's
All those
asleep
in
at the
fa-
switch.
Yes, I'm sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, wait, do we have a motion?
Yes, we
Thank
did.
you.
And a second.
Thank you. The next item is just my normal monthly transfers of surplus funds to scheduled projects, and I recommend your approval.
A motion?
Hello.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to let everyone know, yesterday we passed out each district's copy of the scorecards for Smart Scale. Today I have a full set for each of you, so I'll be happy to hand those out at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Schneider.
And Madam Secretary and board members, I have 1 item that I would request your approval on this morning. It is a limited access control change for Route 171, Victory Boulevard in York County. This would allow for a break in the limited access along Route 171 for the construction of a right-in, right-out, left-in, left-out commercial entrance to serve as direct access for a planned commercial development. VDOT has reviewed this request, and we would recommend your approval.
Make a motion to approve.
Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Bronco, good morning.
Secretary Valentine, Commissioner, and CTB board members, again, good morning. I have 1 decision briefing before you today. The decision briefing from Russell County Board of Supervisors, Bristol District. Commemorative naming of Route 803 Ball Hollow Road from the intersection with Route 624 to the end of state maintenance, approximately 1/10 of a mile, in Russell County as the Brandon Looney Memorial Highway. The Russell County Board of Supervisors would like to memorialize the life of Brandon Looney, who passed away on July 19, 2017. Brandon just finished his junior year in high school and was loved by many students and faculty members. He graduated top of his class in his junior year from the Russell County Career and Technical Center. VDOT supports this request.
Madam Secretary, I apologize. Madam Chairman, I'm very reserved in my comments, as you and my colleagues know, but at this time, I can't say enough about what this will mean to the family. This is a terrible and unspeakable tragedy that befell this young man. And with that, I would most wholeheartedly support and make the motion that this carry.
Thank you, Mr. I have a second.
Second.
All those in favor, please stand. Thank you. Mr. Lawson.
morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I have one item before you today. It is an action on the designation of I-95 Express Lanes, Fredericksburg Extension as hot lanes, and the authorization of the Commissioner to enter into an updated memorandum of understanding with Federal Highway regarding the tolling of the facility. As you recall, last month, Fredericksburg District Engineer Ms. Parker made a presentation to you on this topic, and I'd be glad to answer any questions if you have any at this time.
Chairman, I'd make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you, Mr. Lawson.
Thank you.
Mr. Caples, good morning.
Morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I have 8 projects for your consideration today. First project is order number N01. This is a Hampton Roads project, a bridge replacement over 173 and I-64 and the CSX Railroad. After conducting an analysis of the bid submitted, we have found that the bids submitted represent market value as well as a good value for the Commonwealth, and we recommend for your approval.
Make a motion, we approve.
Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Next project is order number A23. This is a Stanton District Smart Scale project for intersection reconstruction in Frederick County. 3 bids received on this project. Again, after conducting an analysis, we have found that the bids submitted represent market value and a good value to the Commonwealth. We are seeking for your we're recommending for your approval this morning.
Madam Chairman, I so move.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
That concludes our regular construction and maintenance funded jobs. Now we're going to go to our paving plant mix contracts. The first order number is order number 229. This is a Salem District plant mix contract in Botetourt, Carroll, Montgomery, and Roanoke counties with 1 bid submitted on this project. We have conducted our bid analysis, and we do find that the bids represent good value, and we're recommending for award.
Mr. Smoot.
So move.
Any further discussion?
I just assume this applies to what Marty was indicating, the nature of the geography limits your bidders.
It does. Madam Secretary, just a comment too. We have been working on an ongoing discussion about ways of providing more competition, perhaps by breaking down some of the geographic boundaries that we create between districts to attempt to have more than 1 bidder for some of these projects.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you.
Next project is order number 974. This is a Nova District project, Fairfax and Prince William counties. We had 1 bidder on this project as well. After conducting an analysis of the bids submitted, we have found that the bids represent good value, and we're recommending for your approval.
Chairman, I move approval.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you.
Next project is order number 138. This is a Bristol District plant mix project in Smith and Washington counties. We had 2 bidders on this project. Again, after conducting an analysis of the bids, we find that they represent good value and market value and are recommending for your approval.
So move.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Next project is order number 740. This is a Culpeper District plant mix contract in Culpeper, Fauquier, and Rappahannock counties. 3 offers or 3 bidders on this project. After conducting analysis, we find that it represents both market value and a good value for the Commonwealth, and we recommend for your approval.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Order number 982 is another Northern Virginia District plant mix contract in Fairfax County. We had 4 offers on this project. After conducting analysis, we find that it both represents market value and a good value for the Commonwealth, and we recommend for your approval.
Secretary, I move approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
And the final project today is order number 990, another Northern Virginia District Plant Mix contract in Fairfax County. 5 offers on this project. Again, after conducting our analysis, we find that it represents both market value and a good value for the Commonwealth, and we recommend for your approval.
Secretary, move.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Caples. With that, any new business from our board that you'd like to bring forward?
Madam
I know
Chairman? I'm sorry.
Ms. Hines?
I just wanted to call everybody's attention. I left the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority's annual report at everybody's desk. That the report is required by the legislation that establishes MVTA, but it gives you a good overview of the various kinds of projects that are underway. And there's a map in the back that shows on a much larger geography sort of what's going on. We think it could be the basis for some kind of a game, trying to figure out the transportation game you could play on this map. But anyway, it's, I think, a very well-done report and covers a lot of the good work we've been doing.
I will look forward to reading this. We actually have a presentation to the Northern Virginia Caucus, and so make sure.
There
I
are
might
a
take
few
some
more-
extras.
There are a few more reports on the back
Which is really
table.
great, so thank you for that. I know Mr. Fairson, I asked him to take care of something that was just brought to my attention. However, his wife actually is quite a health food expert, and so anyway, she has left some energy balls on the table over here, so I know it would be very sad if they were left, so.
They're now called,
With that, we adjourn. I thank you very much. We're in Richmond next month, and we will be working a lot.